Say it alphabetically, either first name, last name. They were thinking maybe middle name today, but let's take a pause on that. Let me introduce our special guest. This is Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi. Super accomplished guy. He did his bachelor's, his undergraduate work at UCLA. He did his MA at Georgetown, did his PhD at Oxford. He's going to give another lecture on Tuesday next week. And from there, he will go to one of the many affiliations he's got academically at Harvard, and then on to Barcelona. But he's often in Rome, he's in Madrid. I was lucky enough to have his company with Stacy Shelton, an alum of USC, in Madrid and Istanbul in January. Anyway, bottom line, a bit of a globetrotter, and I've asked him if he would maybe talk to you about an issue of his choice, and he chose this one. Ibrahim, I can't thank you enough, and we look forward to your talk.
All right, thank you. So, remind me, what time do we end?
We should finish by noon.
By noon. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
forgive me.
I don't see a clock. No, it's okay. That's why I bring these old school clocks. Okay. This is a lecture I put together after the events that happened over the weekend. Okay, we are living through momentous times. What do I mean by negative sovereignty? Today's lecture is going to combine, it's comparative politics, but it's going to combine what we call historical sociology. How do we use the past to understand the present, as well as a bit of political philosophy to ask, what is a nation? And what does a border mean for a nation? This is the question I want to ask, and I'm applying it to Mexico. Now, how did I get this idea? So first of all, and USD really needs a history of law course. This is basically, what does it mean to violate a nation's sovereignty and undermine the system of international law that defines the relations between nations? We have to look at this subject historically. And having said that, a lot of the history we're going to go over today should make you feel uncomfortable. This is from one of my favorite accounts. It's run by a librarian. Studying history will sometimes make you uncomfortable. And I just had I had jaw surgery. So talking about history is also making me feel very uncomfortable now. So bear with me. Studying history will sometimes make you feel deeply upset. Studying history will sometimes make you feel extremely angry. If studying history always makes you feel proud and happy, you probably aren't studying history. Okay. So having said that, let us begin with a historical overview. What am I going to do today is this. We focus on people crossing the border from Mexico to the US. What I'm going to give you today is a history of the other way around. What has crossed Mexico's borders? Okay. Now, it is, of course, a rhetorical question because we also take for granted borders are a modern invention. For most of human history, what we think of borders did not exist. So I'm going to explain. Okay. So first of all, when I said for most of human history, border didn't exist, let's look at our land acknowledgement and analyze this through a political science lens. I want to acknowledge the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Okay. The Kumeyaay Nation are a nation without a state. In other words, the Kumeyaay Nation would have existed before this border came and divided this nation in half, so that you have a Kumeyaay Nation without a state that reflects their aspirations. They are a nation divided into two states. This part of the Kumeyaay Nation belongs to the United States of America. What about this political entity? What is it known as? We call this the United States of America. We often forget this is the United States of Mexico. We tend to forget it's the United States of Mexico with a good 31, if I'm not mistaken, states. So in other words, it's not only is the nation divided into two states, then subdivided into the state of California and Baja California. Okay, I like this land acknowledgement. And I like using this border because from there, I want to go to an image created by one of your professors on this campus, Professor Mercado, who created this image for the Day of the Dead. And basically, what is she doing without speaking? And we're going to look at a lot of what's called semiotics, the invisible language that we all share as a society. She is comparing the border between the United States and Mexico and Gaza and Israel, and is making an argument on the Day of the Dead. She is saying, let us remember those who died because these borders exist. You see, she doesn't have to say it. The imagery says it all. So if I compare this, and remember, if this is a class on comparative politics, look how I'm teaching through the act of comparison. I'm comparing one border, I'm comparing that border to another border that has witnessed intense conflict since October 7, 2023. And then I go back in time to look at another border. And I want you to think, by 1777, this is how far we could go back in time to find evidence of borders, okay? Being drawn here, the Ottoman state and the Venetian state is really today is Croatia. If any of you have Croatian heritage, Venice controlled Croatia. That's why it's primarily Catholic today. And here we have the Ottoman state. Okay. In other words, by 1777, what is entering our political imagination? The idea of states delineated by borders. I want you to think, during the age of the Roman Empire, was there a border you crossed and you had to show a passport saying, I have a visa to the Roman Empire? No. Basically, if you see an empire on a map, and if you look at the color of how much land they control, that's how far they could collect taxes. There was no such thing as official borders where there's like a line with a gate, you show a passport, and you cross, okay? By 1777, borders are developing for a particular reason. Plague, the Black Death, bubonic plague. Borders were created as, and you all lived through it, okay? The vaccine passport is really just what led to the invention of the passport as we know it. Yes, borders were created to get the sick, to prevent the sick from crossing into their territory to infect others. So now, what do I mean by negative sovereignty? I want you to look at this article. It's 2020, and what did I write? And this is how I got interested in the subject of the Mexican border, is because primarily I work on Iraq. Trump treats Iraq with the same disrespect he's shown Mexico. What do I mean by this? Mexico and Iraq are states acted upon by the US. Okay, the US can do things in Mexico without necessarily having to ask for the permission of the leader of both states. Okay, what had just happened when I wrote this article in 2020? The US assassinated a general on Iraqi soil, an Iranian general on Iraqi soil, bringing fears. I don't even know if you remember in January 2020, what was the most common search term on Google? Are we starting at World War III? And how did World War I start? But sure enough, COVID came and the fears of a world war subsided. Okay. Based on that, here I'm going to give you a crash course IR theory. I don't know if you've had crash course IR theories. I mean, if you've had IR theory yet, but a crash course works like this really quickly before we go any further. Okay. If you basically, if you're a politician or you yourself see the international arena as that of competition and conflict, the easy answer is you belong to the realist school. If you believe there's possibility of cooperation and collaboration, particularly through international organizations, I know it all ends in the TIONs, okay. You belong to the liberal institutional school. Okay, if you believe politics, and I'm doing a lot of this is what we would call the constructivist school, but I put the word construction just to make the retention easier. If you believe that a lot of politics exists in our imagination, we choose to create problems that aren't objectively out there. If you believe politics is subjective, this is either known as the constructivist school, and the sub-school in that is called securitization theory. And securitization theory says this: the border is just a bunch of concrete. When you put value on the border and saying this is what guards our safety, okay, you're securitizing basically a vertical piece of concrete and metal, the border. Right? When you say build the wall, right? Are you talking about building a wall like this? No, you're saying build the wall to protect us. It's implicit, right? That's securitization. And then the other C is just colonial, post-colonial study. And in this case, I'm going to look at something called necropolitics versus narcopolitics. And necropolitics, I'm going to show you, is basically when politicians allow certain people to die a slow death. A slow, eventual, long, drawn-out death. Narcopolitics, you all know, and I would argue there is a fusion between the two. Okay, so let's practice IR theory in memes. Okay, look at Phoebe, look at Joey, this is 2020, and ask yourself this, who is the liberal institutionalist or the multilateralist, and who is the realist nationalist? So Phoebe says, COVID-19, Joey says, COVID-19 requires, flag of Cuba, requires cooperation. COVID-19 requires cooperation. Steal medical equipment from our allies. Okay, Phoebe, the liberal institutional school, the multilateral. Joey, conflict and competition. See, he doesn't say it, but by the time you end with that score, Joey's a realist. Okay. Now, if anyone wants a really good review, I found this account. It's called International Relations Theory through Ryan Gosling. Okay, so let's begin. Hey girl, I came up with a two-state solution. You and me, that's an obvious reference to the Middle East. Hey girl, the world is in a state of anarchy and the only two rational actors are you and me. That's Ryan being a realist. If the world is in a state of anarchy and rational actors rationally seek to maximize their power, that's conflict and competition. And then, of course, does even Mr. Ryan talk about borders? Hey, girl, I just want to resolve your border dispute. As we're going through right now, this was produced in 2012. It hasn't aged. It's still valuable. Okay, so here you go. That's our overview of IR theory. Now let's apply it. What's the me search behind the research? How did I get interested in this subject? This is a picture I took going to Iraq in 2004. And what interested me is the following. Here I'm an Iraqi American, okay? So literally I'm negotiating two borders. The American side allows me to go on this side of the concrete. And you have to understand, this is a border. This is a border. No Iraqi can cross this border. Any Iraqi approaching this column of military equipment piling in from Kuwait would be shot on sight. In fact, the greatest amount of Iraqi deaths were because they got too close to American convoys. This is a border within Iraq. Hypothetically, this concrete violates the sovereignty of the Iraqi nation. There was no Iraqi leader to say, I'm okay with this. The US did this and this just said, this is the rule. This is a violation of Iraqi sovereignty. Now, what fascinated me was I was taking a picture of this alpha male for a reason. I wanted to get these guys on the historical record because I spoke to them. And I asked them, where were they from? They were from El Paso, Texas. And their English was, they weren't native English speakers. Okay. So when I asked them, where are they from? They said El Paso, and their English wasn't native. More or less, I put two and two together. These guys were mostly of Mexican origin who joined the military to get fast track for US citizenship. To become American citizens, they had to go fight in Iraq. In other words, to cross one border from Mexico to the US, they had to go to Iraq to enforce another border between the US and the Iraqis. Okay. This is what I mean by comparative politics. You're comparing experiences that transcends borders and time. So this is how I got interested in the borders. This is February 2017. So I want you to think what happened over the last weekend in February 2025. Here, I'm going to Los Angeles International Airport because another set of borders has been imposed. For all the controversy that happened last weekend, you are probably, I'm not sure if you could remember it. In my time during the first Trump administration, it wasn't about deporting people on planes. It was about preventing people from planes landing. You see, the first thing that rallied the base under the first Trump administration was something called the Muslim ban, where literally he made a decision where Syrian refugees might be on a plane with that visa to the US and they were turned around. Can you imagine that? They would have been in mid-air getting the news they could not enter the US. You see, the border was here. We tend to forget sometimes the borders are not that concrete barrier right there. An airport is an international border. And I took this picture because this was a group of people holding this flag. They were, because I wanted to compare that flag and make us think about the comparisons. What do flags mean? I'm comparing that to this image. I was not present for this. I was present for this, but by LAX, what highway is there? Really close next to it? 5 and the 101. And these were the images from last week and over the 101. In LA, everyone was focusing on something else, unfortunately, Conway and this poor unfortunate woman who was, I don't know if you're following that celebrity gossip, by the way, she's an architect. That never got into the news, but everyone was focusing on the news on the Grammys. I want to focus on these flags that closed 101. What were they objecting to? You have to understand, there were protests at LAX in February 2017. And these protests like shut down 101. What about the other way? Planes taking people away from the US to cross other borders. Okay, and here we are, almost coming full cycle. It's a comparison of basically the politics of borders. So if you're taking a class on comparative politics, this is now where we're getting into the realm of political theory. My argument is this: the nation defines itself as a comparison. Usually a comparison, a negative comparison. We define ourselves by what are we not. What makes Americans different from Canadians? They both speak English. Both were former British colonies. The Canadians are polite, we are not. The Canadians say about and we do not. What separates the Irish from the English? The Irish lost their language, they all speak English. In fact, they drink more tea than the British, right? So what do the Irish celebrate? Okay, well, we get more drunk than they do. Think of Guinness, right? What is the symbol of the Guinness brand? It's the same symbol on the Irish flag, right? You pick something that distinguishes yourself from the colonizer, right? So here we go, here we begin. The nation is often a comparison, right? That's Italy versus the USA. Let's begin. Let's go to Captain America. Name one character who could beat Captain America. Name one character who could beat Captain America. Go ahead, I'll wait. The answer is Captain Vietnam. Okay, you see what's happening here? Even though Captain America is fictitious, right? You see, how are you distinguishing yourself? You are basically projecting the nation, even on a fictitious hero. And of course, if Mexico would have its own version of Captain America. Now, I want you to see here, Super Cholo, Captain Mexico, and Vato Man. Do you notice the piñata here? These are all digital artifacts from the first Trump administration. And how was Captain America born? How was Captain America born? As a way to raise money for the US war effort during World War II. You see, Captain America is what America is about. By definition, what is it not? It's not Nazi Germany, nor is it, God, what a freaky character. I didn't realize this right now, but it's not Nazi Germany, you see. A nation is a comparison, often by using a story about who are our heroes and who are our villains. Let's look at another example. Our heroes sometimes can be animals. Take a wild guess. How does Australia distinguish itself from America? Again, both former British colonies, both speak English. So here you go. If the nation is the act of comparison by what we are not, look at the American bald eagle, one of the smallest eagles in the world. The Australian wedge-tailed eagle, one of the largest eagles in the world. Only eats little fish. Hunts large mammals, including kangaroos, can see infrared and ultraviolet. Basically a glorified seagull. Only eagle in the world that attacks parachutes and paragliders. Take a wild guess who created this meme. It's an Australian, most likely, right? And do you see how this Australian creates the nation by the act of saying, what are we not? We do not have this little wimpy bird that has no hair. It's a joke. Why is it called a bald eagle? Does it want Rogaine? Is it going through a midlife crisis? Bald is the old English word for white. Yeah, white head. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, are you a full-bred American? Yeah, my dad's a bald eagle, and my mom is a Big Mac. Okay. Compare that to this. Bald eagles dying of bird flu is such an apt symbol of the US in 2025. In other words, this isn't just a bird dying from a virus. It's supposed to be an avatar, okay, of America dying in 2025. Produced again just over the weekend. The politics of what just happened over the weekend is giving me a lecture that I don't think I'm going to finish today in the time I have with you. This again came out in 2016. And I want you to think of the difference, and I want you to see if you can get the semiotics. Can you understand this? So let's begin. Patriotism is pride in who you are. Nationalism is pride in who you're not. This is a reference to Steve Bannon, a very close Trump aide in the first administration. Patriotism is my country can do better. Do you know who this is even referring to? I'm wondering if you could remember. Yes? Okay, very good. So you still remember this act. Nationalism, my country, right or wrong, love it or leave it. See, there's the comparison. If you don't like it, if you don't think it's right, then you leave it, right? Patriotism, learning from history, the Civil War. Nationalism, reinventing history. People like being slaves. Patriots fought Nazis. Nationalists often are Nazis. Does anyone recognize the imagery of this particular box in the comment? And again, it's aged. It's 2017. Yes? Charlottesville. Very good. So you're getting it. You still have a bit of the semiotic memory. You still remember a bit of the past. Excellent. Has anything changed now as we go into the next 2025 for the next 4 years? Has any of this lost relevance? Okay, in other words, these are structural dynamics embedded in this country, not just in this country, any other country. We could compare nationalisms all over the world. So that's how I define nationalism then. Okay, now let's just apply it. I've given you the theory. Let's go back. Prisoners of geography. Do you notice how this territory here comes together almost like a funnel, a fulcrum, a hinge, an axis, right? Without putting borders, you could pretty much, sometimes taking away the borders help us see things we wouldn't normally. That, from the funnel all the way to here, this is the narrow hinge in which two continents are connected. By definition, if you want power over this land, you would want to control this hinge, this axis. Again, this is the geographical argument. So let's begin. And who control the central axis, otherwise known as Mesoamerica? You begin with a civilization known as the Olmecs, known for these very big, elaborate statues. You have other civilizations, or I should say cultures, known as the Zapotecs. You had the Mayan city-states. They weren't really a centralized authority. That's why we don't call it the Mayan Empire, but the Aztecs were an empire with a capital, Tenochtitlan. Now, you might say it's not a big empire. That's not the thing. Empire is not about size. Empire is a model. And the easy way to understand empire is this. What is it not? Empire is about glory of the capital. That's why we call it the Roman Empire, not the Italian Empire. In the old days, the Russian Empire was about Moscow. Okay, later they changed the capital to St. Petersburg. It gets confusing, so we call it the Russian Empire. But basically, you expand for the glory of Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, established by a group of nomadic peoples from probably what is today Arizona, next to the Kumeyaay Nation, working their way down. Okay. And the thing about empire is this. If you live in a neighboring city like Tlaxcala, okay, you are not citizens of the Aztec Empire. You are subservient to Tenochtitlan. This is not an equal relationship. Empire, by definition, is a lopsided arrangement. So, if you look at this map, here is the first person to basically, I would argue, cross Mexico's borders, Hernan Cortez. Now, Hernan Cortez, I would say, his invasion began the modern world. And I define modernity by the following. Does it have a condition of mass? Did Hernan Cortez travel a mass distance? Absolutely. From Extremadura in Spain, he traveled a mass distance to the shores of what he called the true coast, Veracruz. And from that point onwards, did a mass of Spaniards follow him to settle Mexico? Absolutely. And from that point onward, did a mass of native Mexicans die? Absolutely. And from that point onward, we're a mass of slaves imported from Africa. All of that makes my criteria. This is the beginning of the modern world. And the thing is, when he conquered Chico and when he conquered Tlaxcala, right? How did 300 Spaniards cause so much devastation? It's following. It's the following. You had gunpowder, the cannons. The cannons explain everything. You see, in the year 1500s, there were three powers that dominated the world. They were the superpowers: the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Mughal Empire, corresponding to India, Iran, and Turkey today. Collectively, in the year 1500, they were known as the gunpowder empires. Gunpowder was invented by China, ironically by a guy who wanted to live forever. He was looking for the Philosopher's Stone, same thing from Harry Potter, right? Trying to live forever, and he ended up killing himself, putting together a combination that shouldn't have been mixed, but the rest is history. The creation of gunpowder basically creates a formula where you could deliver death two ways. You could put gunpowder in a tube. Today we call that a rocket or a missile. Or you could use it to project a cannonball. All right. And again, I would say the cannonball is the beginning of mass destruction. How so? Okay, let me do an experiment. I need a volunteer just to give me your name. Okay, thank you. So thank you for volunteering. So little do you know, I have a gladio sword and I'm going to start chopping off your head. What's your name? Sorry. Yeah, I'm chopping off your head. Okay, what do you guys do? Really? You got to make some friends. Yeah. You should be saving her, right? You should be saving her. I have a gladio and I'm chopping off her head. What do you do? Okay, I guess you run or, okay, but it would take me a while to chop off her head with a gladio. You've seen a gladio. It's a small sword. You've seen it in Gladiator, Gladiator 2. It's just the Roman word for sword. By the way, in Latin, what do you call the place where the gladio is stored? And it says a lot about a gladio, a Roman soldier, stored it in his vagina. What is the word vagina? Literally comes from the place where the Roman soldier stored his sword. And it tells you a lot. Men obviously invented the word for genitalia that we use to this day. It says a lot about who invented that word. But by the way, okay, I can only chop off your head with a gladio. And I assume most of you will run and call the police. If a cannonball entered this classroom, how many of us would die? Okay. That's mass destruction. We don't call cannons weapons of mass destruction, but technically, could a mass of people die instantaneously? Okay. The thing about cannons is this: they made city walls irrelevant. You see, the city wall no longer can withstand the invasion of a foreign army. The minute you blew a hole in the city wall, the foreign army comes in, your city was vulnerable. If city walls are now being made redundant. And you have to think the first great political philosopher, modern political philosopher, is named Niccolo Machiavelli. Why do I call him a modern philosopher, Machiavelli? Because he was writing at the time when the cannon was introduced into the battlefield. Then what happens? Well, you replace the cannons. You replace the city walls. Disband them and create a new wall. This is what I argue is the second factor that led to the border. Okay, if the cannon makes creating city walls redundant, let's make a new arrangement. The city walls are now useless. Let's create a national border. That will be our new wall. And we will raise a national army to protect us from enemies. This is the great transition. Of course, the Spaniards are on the borders of the Ottoman Empire. They too will eventually get the cannon and they'll bring it and conquer Mexico with it. The weapon of mass destruction. Now, what is interesting, and here comes the real beginning of our lecture. What is this Aztec person saying? When the cannons were fired, all the Aztecs who had never seen gunpowder ran in confusion like they were on the mushrooms that confused the mind. What does this tell us? This is a historical record in the 1519. Yeah, Mesoamericans were consuming the magic mushroom with the active ingredient psilocybin, which was a religious sacrament. Okay, this is one of the first evidence we have in history of psychedelics. Why am I talking about cannons and psychedelics? For this reason. Crossing the border, I'm saying this is a history of not Mexicans crossing the border, but the other way around. What began? The psychedelic craze began in Mexico when a banker named R. Gordon Wasson found a woman named Maria Sabina, who was still keeping the practice of using the mushroom as a religious sacrament alive. Why was I saying she was keeping it alive? The Spanish Inquisition forbade it. The Spanish Inquisition forbade the native inhabitants of Mexico of using the mushroom as religious sacraments. You replace the mushroom with the communion wafer, according to Catholicism, right? And from this point onwards, this was the age of psychedelic Orientalism. Who started to come to Mexico, particularly Oaxaca? Hippies. Hippies, remember, this is the counterculture, the psychedelic counterculture. They went in two directions. One direction is to Afghanistan for opium, and the other direction, Americans started to cross the border to come to Oaxaca. Okay. Well, let's go back to Cortez. What else did Cortez have to his advantage? Horses. When Cortez crossed the border, no Native American, no indigenous Mexican had ever seen a horse, nor had they ever seen a war dog. You don't see it in this picture, but the Spaniards weaponized dogs. No native indigenous Mexican had ever seen iron. The Americas never had an iron age. And what could no Native American have ever seen? Something invisible coming out of the horse's nostrils, as well as this guy's nostrils. You see, when we domesticated the horse, we inherited all the diseases that infected horses. The common cold, one of the viruses, there are 200 viruses that will give us the common cold. The common cold is just our immune system ramping up to kill this foreign body entering our body. One of those viruses came from the horse. So whether you are a Native American getting exposed to a horse or to the Spaniard, you're getting exposed to viruses that you had never seen because in most of the Americas, they did not domesticate animals. Okay. What else? So here we see the iron of the conquistadors. This is the Battle of Cholula, right? Now, this is what gets forgotten. Who's helping the conquistadors conquer the Aztec Empire? Indigenous Mexicans. You see, they were allies. This was really a Mexican civil war. It's told as a story of a Spanish victory, but it was really a Mexican civil war. And they did have great weapons. The obsidian sword. Obsidian is a natural volcanic rock. To this day, surgeons prefer obsidian over iron. Okay. Now let's do a comparison, telling the story of Mexico in 3 images. I compare that to Diego Rivera's great mural. And Diego Rivera is telling the story of Mexico, picking our villains and heroes. The conquistadors are the villains. And what have they introduced? The cannon you see here. Here's the cannon, the weapon of mass destruction. And here's the story of how the Spanish came to defeat us. This is a native Mexican's account of how the Spanish came to defeat us. And this is a German's account of how the Mexicans were defeated, but as a celebration. The artist is a guy named Emmanuel Loitze. Emmanuel Loitze now is celebrating the victory of the conquistadores, Cortez, over the Mexicans, the Aztecs. The year 1848 tells it all. The US had just won the Mexican American. This is why where I'm standing now, we're in the United States and not Mexico. 1848. What does this German care about this victory? Why is he painting this celebration? Because basically he's saying Cortez represents white Europeans, just like the Americans, and just like me, Emmanuel Loitze. And this is a victory over the indigenous inhabitants of Mexico. Whether it was in the 1521 or 1848, it's history repeating itself, and he's celebrating it. See? Now you might say, okay, big deal. This is a German painter, right? He actually gave America its most famous painting. You see, what is a nation? A nation is a hero, right? Emmanuel Loitze painted this iconic painting. It's 1851. You see, what is the American nation? You share your heroes, whether it's Captain America or George Washington. Loitze was a German nationalist. You see, no Germany existed in those days. So basically, what is he projecting on? We Germans need our George Washington. See, this is not for an American audience per se. He would come to America and paint it, but he's basically telling a message to the Germans. We need our George Washington. He was a German nationalist. So What begins next is what I call the Columbian extraction or the slow death of necropolitics. And it works like this. No European, African, or Asian had ever seen maize, or what we call corn. Corn has a lot of calories, and it's going to lead to populations explosions in China and Africa. The world is going to get a lot bigger the minute corn comes from the Aztec Empire and enters thanks to Columbus. Can you imagine an Italian not having access to tomatoes? Or in Nahua, the native language of the Aztecs, Nahua, written with a TL at the end. Tomato. The Spaniards didn't like that TL sound. They made it a no. Tomato becomes tomato. It's a fruit, and it revolutionizes Italian cuisine. There was no potato. Can you imagine the Irish without their access to their potatoes? Again, replace the L with an O, potato, and the Irish population explodes. Tragically addicted to this single crop. What do I mean by necropolitics is this? How many of you have Irish descent? Look at the question. I don't even have to ask, are any of you Irish? I'm saying, how many of you have Irish descent? I know for a fact, raise your hands. I know it for a fact, right? How do I know? Because when the potato was cultivated in Ireland, right? What happened? It got infected with a blight, an organism that killed the potato crop. The most reasons why you are here is the potato crop failed and your ancestors were starving. Now, what do I mean by necropolitics is this? Your queen, Victoria, had enough food to feed you. Your Irish ancestors, she just chose to sell it on the international market and let you starve. That's a slow death. She condemned you to a famine. Famine is necropolitics. You were her colonial subjects and not worthy of being fed. The food was sold on the international market. You had to make a run for it. What's the closest place to the harbors of Ireland? If the earth is round, you're going to land in the port of Boston. And the rest is history. And you brought St. Patrick's Day with you. Okay. Potato. Peanuts. The peanut is a bean. It's not a nut. High caloric intake as well. Again, this is what we call a New World crop. Turkeys, pumpkins, squash, sweet potatoes. We call it sweet potatoes because we have no word for it. The misnomer of a pepper. You could not die of smoking and cancer before 1492. Tobacco, like psychedelic mushrooms, were used as a sacrament in Native American religions. No pineapples. How many of you have a pineapple allergy? Yeah, because you weren't, yeah, me too. Because we weren't evolved, it was a New World crop. Historically, we didn't evolve to take in pineapple. No chocolato. No chocolato. Or the Spaniards just inverted it, called it chocolate, right? And of course, chocolate in Mesoamerica was not sweet because no Mesoamerican had access to sugar. It was used as usually what we would say a savory dish, right? No beans and no vanilla. Okay. What did the native indigenous inhabitants of the Americans get from the Europeans? Citrus fruits. The word lemon is a Chinese word. Lemons came from China. Oranges came from Asia. You might say, how did they get their vitamin C? It's a myth that you can only get vitamin C from this. And by the way, the vitamin C you get from an orange and lemon is in the skin, not the fruit. If you really want to protect your immune system, you're much better off eating a strawberry or a kiwi. Kiwi, highest dose of vitamin C is a kiwi or strawberry. No grapes, no wine, no bananas, no sugar. And I want you to imagine this. If you aren't eating sugar between 1492, biologically, from an evolutionary perspective, it's going to cause a shock to your system. Think of a hyper kid, right? What is sugar doing to it? It's a shock to that kid's system. No honeybees. Now, let's keep on going here. No onions, no olives, turnips, no coffee. Coffee came from the port of, actually coffee came from here, the port of Mocha. Mocha is hard to say, so you guys pronounce it as mocha. It has nothing to do with mixing chocolate with coffee. It's just the port of Yemen where all coffee was shipped from. No peaches, no pears. No cereals besides corn. That means no wheat for bread, no rice, no barley, no oats. I want you to think of all the Latin American dishes that have rice today. But there was also no meat from a cow. No sheep, no cerdo, no pigs, no horses. And cattle, what did the cattle give us? Cows, when we domesticated cows, they gave us smallpox, the greatest killer in human history, as well as its cousin, cowpox. Chickens, there should be a category for chickens, gave us chickenpox. There's a connection, yeah. Sheep, no, so what, pigs. Pigs gave us influenza, particularly when pigs hang around with ducks is a bad combination. Right? Bird flu mixing with a mammal like a pig is going to create a new virus. Measles probably came from cows. Malaria is one of the oldest organisms. It's not a virus, it's not a bacteria. Cows also gave us tuberculosis, one of the deadliest bacteria in the world. All these diseases, no Native American could have an immunity to. And what's the result? So let's do a test. Avocado, its real name is aguacatl. Aguacatl and Nawa, what does it mean? It means testicles. Yeah, that's why the native indigenous Mexicans saw that and said balls. Okay, very good. If you're a Spanish sailor on a ship for a long time, you've arrived in Mexico and saw this growing on a tree, what would you call it? A venilla. The old Spanish word for, again, excuse my language, vagina. Okay, it's entered our language twice. Yeah, look at it. Dirty imagination when you're going to Baskin and Robbins asking for vanilla, now you know what you're asking for. Okay. So now let's bring all of this together. This is McDonald's Mexico. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But ironically, before 1492, a person from London could not eat this. Why not? London, what's in here? What flavor is this? Vagina ice cream, right? Vanilla, right? No chocolate, no peanuts. Okay. The only thing a Londoner would have access to, and it was hugely expensive, was the sugar. Now this comes to the next part of the lecture. What has obviously crossed Mexico's border? And I gotta be careful because I think the building I'm in is named after the founder of McDonald's, the Kroc family. Ray Kroc is the great, this building, this is McDonald's money. Anyway, but I'm not talking about McDonald's, I'm talking about the sugar flooded the Mexican market. As a result of the North America Free Trade Association, this is what crossed the border, sugar.
Yeah, Ibrahim, originally, Joan Kroc, when she gave us the money, wanted to call the building the Gandhi Center. So someone said something like, I don't know, McDonald's, Gandhi, maybe not a good combination.
That's interesting that she, okay, it's on that, but yeah, now you know where this money comes from. And so yes, McDonald flooded the Mexican market. Okay. Ironically, what are these called? Okay, and before 1492, no French person could have potatoes. Okay. Now here's the irony, they're technically Belgian fried. You know there's more, before 1492, a French person could not have ketchup. Why not? No? Tomatoes. There's more sugar in this than in the sundae, by the way. If you do the percentage, there is more sugar in this pack. Have a couple of packs of ketchup, you're probably getting in more sugar in your body than the sundae itself. And, okay, let's not just pick on McDonald's. Here's Burger King and Chiapas. Here's Burger King. North America Free Trade Association makes it a lot easier for Burger King to spread to Chiapas. Now, what am I arguing is the native inhabitants of Chiapas that definitely have much more indigenous ancestry than other parts of Mexico aren't evolutionarily prepared for the gluten in wheat or the sugar, you see. Because before 1492, and by the way, speaking of Mr. Kroc, a guy who worked for Mr. Kroc, his last name was, take a wild guess, Bell. Bell. Taco Bell has nothing to do with the bell in a bell tower. It's actually the founder. Oh, his name was Mr. Bell. What can a Mexican not have eaten before 1492 in this arrangement here? And this is not Mexican food, by the way. Chimichanga is not Mexican food, but what did you not have eaten in here?
Cheese.
The cheese, very good. What else? Cheese coming from a cow. What else? The beef coming from a cow. What else? The tomato's the only thing that's native. The tomato is the only thing that's native. It's tomato, right? The tortilla made out of what? Tortillas should be made out of corn. This is a tortilla made out of flour. The good old gluten in it. And what else? Eggs coming from a chicken, very good. The beef, the onions, there you go. Before 1492, a Mexican could not drink this. No grapes. But what I'm saying, what do you think this is full of? Again, sugar. And look at this, that's made in Mexico, a jarrito. Where did this come from? The orange fruit, what do we call it? A mandarin, coming from China. Like I said, lemons, mandarins, they all came from China. And again, what do you think this is full of? Okay. So the first thing that crossed the border when we look at the politics of the North American Free Trade Association is diabetes. Now, of course, now let's get to the Mexicans who do cross the border. Do they have medical insurance? In a place like Salinas, where 1/3 of all the lettuce is cultivated? No. You all know probably Monterey and Carmel next door to Salinas. Okay, and here's where we begin the kind of health, geographical determinants of health. Monterey, Carmel, look at the difference. Carmel, with a population of 7,000 people, is where I grew up. Clint Eastwood was our mayor. Brad Pitt has a house there. Compared to Salinas, 30,000 people, and where most of the world's lettuce comes from. So if you're uninsured and undocumented and need to get diabetes care because of what NAFTA has done to the country, where will you get insulin from? Well, here comes necropolitics. And it's it's highlighted in this article by somebody, a doctor named Sabah Al-Marashi. It's my mom. What did my mom establish? A nonprofit diabetes program, which includes medication and nutritional guidance. She doesn't speak a word of Spanish. I'm the one who has to speak the Spanish and tell them everything I showed you. Can you imagine telling somebody not to drink jarritos? That's my job. She's a volunteer. She doesn't get paid to do this, right? Now, what is she saying? A few years ago, one of my mom's patients, a man in his 20s, died after he couldn't afford insulin. There are more cases like this, she says. These stories are real. That's necropolitics. You're letting these people die a slow death. In other words, if it weren't for this volunteer organization set up by the Rotary Club, okay, yeah, these people more or less would be dying in the Salinas Valley. The tragedy is this: most people of native Mexican ancestry getting killed by diabetes. What is amazing is they survive some of the world's most deadliest diseases. If you want nightmares, Google smallpox. It's fortunate none of us have to deal with it. If you thought COVID was bad, it's nothing compared to smallpox. And this is an image of what it did to the native populations of the Americas. So this is the thing. The Spaniards first landed in the Caribbean, Hispaniola, what we call Haiti, and 100% of the population died. Just they could not stand up to these diseases. By the time they got to Mexico, the population was fared a bit better. If any of you have ancestry from indigenous Mesoamerican populations, you are a descendant from the lucky 20% who somehow had a genetic mutation that allowed them to survive the onslaught of diseases. It wasn't just cowpox, it was a cocktail of diseases. Because look at this. When Cortez arrived in Mexico, the population was 17 million. More than 100 years later, it barely made 3 million. Population is supposed to explode, right? Exponentially. But you see here, by 1600, it had barely recovered. Germs crossed the border, viruses crossed the border, and they wreaked havoc. So we got diseases. Now what's left? How do we see how was Mexico born? It was born out of a foreign invasion. Technically, the first Mexican would have been the marriage between Hernan Cortez and his local translator, a woman that in Spanish is called Malinche, and in Mexico kind of connotates a traitor because she was Cortez's translator and she opened up the country to her. So let's now look at semiotics. Ask a Mexican the history of this is an actual newspaper article, column. And what is he doing? What's the history of the Virgin of Guadalupe? So, let's begin. Guadalupe's roots spring from the Arabic. The name is a mashup of the Arabic word for valley, wadi, and the Latin for wolf, lupus, what the Moors called a river in Extremadura. Cortez and his merry band of murderous Extremadurans, here comes the politics, venerated a Black Madonna found near their hometown. So it's not stretched to theorize that any Holy Mother appearing before a bunch of Mexicans on the conquistador's watch would assume the nombre of of Guadalupe. Besides, the idea of Islamic-derived Guadalupe is better. Imagine how freaked out gabachos will get when they discover that the Empress of the Americas is part Muslim. Is he speaking entirely in English? This is printed in the Orange County Weekly. Is he speaking entirely in English? No. This is almost a new language that's evolving, right? So who is the Virgin of Guadalupe? You see, if we go to another place that has Guad in it, Guadalajara, or the Wadi of El Hijara, the Wadi of stones, right? Here's how the Virgin looks. Very European. Interesting thing. Always on a crescent moon. I want you to pay attention to this. But by 1773, the Virgin is looking a lot less European and more Mexican, with much more turquoise, indigenous American cultures. Do you see the crescent there, by the way? Crescent is always there with the Virgin of Guadalupe. This is the story of how she was discovered in the sky. And you see what's happening here, whether we're talking about in the Incas or in Mexico. And in the Incas, how do you get the Incan civilization to become Catholic? If they worship the mountain, you basically say you've been worshiping the Virgin Mary all along. By the way, the last Incan king who resisted the Spaniards, captured by the Spaniards, carried away in chains, what was his name? Does anyone know? Tupac Amaru. Does the name Tupac sound familiar to you? Yeah, that's the singer was taking the name of the last Incan rebel. So whether it's Peru or Mexico around the same time, this is how you get Native Americans now to become Catholic under the Spaniards' watch. You make Christianity Central or South America, right? This is in a place called Casa Mexico in Madrid. This is a picture I took. I want you to look at the crescent there. This is another image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Because the interesting thing is the crescent today we associate it with the symbol of Islam. The star and crescent in the Islamic tradition is really the symbol of the Virgin Mary. We tend to forget the Muslims also venerate the Virgin Mary. So they basically appropriated. This is cultural appropriation. They took the Christian symbol and made it their own. In 1683, when they failed to take Vienna, the inhabitants of Vienna, they cooked a pastry called the Weitzer. They shaped it in the shape of a croissant that day, in 1683, when the Ottomans failed to celebrate their victory. They were taking a bite out of Islam. The Austrians had forgotten over time that this was originally a symbol of the Virgin Mary, though. The interesting thing is, you see the crescent there? You pass it almost every day. You probably don't realize that Islamic symbol is really a fusion. The crescent moon that's associated with Islam is really a symbol of the Virgin Mary. This is a church in Lebanon. Even in Lebanon, you always have the Virgin Mary with the crescent. And that crescent moon traveled across the border all the way to Mexico. What else crossed the border? Racism. Racism. Now, what if I told you this? Racism is modern. I already gave you the definition of modernity, right? If I said it involves the condition of mass, how was racism imported into Mexico? And I would argue modern racism was born in Mexico. It was the Spanish theory that if you're 100% Catholic, you have 100% Spanish blood. If you marry a native woman, that child that's born out of the religion does not have 100% pure blood. Limpieza de sangre. Your blood isn't clean. So as a result of that marriage, you are mixed. You are mestizo or mestiza. And because your blood isn't 100% Spanish, what are you? You're an hijo de algo. Hijo de algo, let's abbreviate that in 2A, hidalgo. That's where the word hidalgo comes from, right? You're not 100% pure Spanish. If that's the case, then your status in life is determined the minute you're born. This child's station in life. Basically, what were the Spanish saying? Well, there's all these combinations. What if a Spaniard marries a woman from Africa? Their child is a mulatto or mulatta. Now, what if the mulatta marries somebody who's half Indian and half Spanish? Well, we have to create a category for that. And do you see all the branches or raíces of different combinations? And what do we get? Raíz, branch, racism. See how it's all connected. You see, what is racism? It's basically this. Masses of people have to be categorized. It's so confusing. The casta paintings basically dictated your caste. And this was painted so you could keep track of the varieties of races. And you find them all over South America. How do you keep track of all the combination of humans? This is racism. And the thing is, it's still a legacy in Mexico today. When I say racism was imported, look at this. Again, light skin became synonymous with power, wealth, and destruction. Dark skin meant Indio, loser, poor, stupido. That's why you see light skin Mexicans on television, think Telemundo, in the presidential palaces and in corporate offices. That's racism. So what else? Now, why do I like this image here? Because it's a play. I mean, I put it together. I'm doing comparisons. I just found this on the internet. When you love Star Wars, but you're still down for the barrio. I like it because there's also something else crossing the border of Mexico, the Arabic language. Does anyone speak Arabic? The word barrio is an Arabic word. The word bar means a piece of land. Okay, it means a piece of land. It was an Arabic word that the Moors brought to Spain and again traveled over a huge distance and became the quintessential referent to a Latin American neighborhood. Again, so now we're looking at Halloween costumes. But the thing is, this mixing of religion still goes on today in a cornfield. Remember, this is where corn came from. In Chiapas, Selma Palamo Dia wears a traditional skirt, but she's also became a Muslim. You see, in the 1970s, Islam started to enter Mexico along with evangelical Christianity. Now religions are crossing the border. So this is a Chiapan Muslim. And the mixing is still happening to this very day. So that, as a result of this, Spanish crossed the border of Mexico, making it the largest Spanish-speaking nation today. Followed at number 3, this is always a good reminder, the United States. The Spain from which it originated comes in at number 5. And what's happening here? I'm a good person. Why is this happening to me, mommy? Non te preocupes, nada es eterno. Smile. Jaja, love your consejos, mommy. I know, so tan cute. What's happening here? Well, what am I telling you? I'm telling you a story of fusion, right? It's not a mistake that a channel known as Fusion represented the Latin American or Latinx voice, right? This is a story I'm telling you of not crossing borders, but fusions that are happening despite borders, you see. And here you see it here in 2013. Now let's bring in the politics. Let's bring in the United States. Here's the United States. It's 1830, bordering Mexico. Back then, of course, it was a property of Spain. And here we have an article. It's 1839. The article is entitled Manifest Destiny. And this is how America becomes a superpower. Here begins the stereotypes. What are we Americans? We are not Mexicans. We are not imbecile and distracted. We are the Anglo-Saxons. And what will we do? What is our goal? To be an occupation of California. And just geopolitical speaking, the minute the United States could reach California, they become a political power that could project our power on 2 oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. That was what was destiny. So you see how it begins. This is 1839, and here's my question. Has anything changed? Well, I have to prove it to you. Has anything changed? So basically, this is the war I was referring to in 1848. This was the war. And again, like I said, military forces crossed the border, reached all the way to Mexico City to achieve their outcome. And then after that, when the war is finished and the borders were drawn, what else crossed America's borders? I'm sorry, Mexico's borders? American capital. I particularly want you to look at this symbol because we tend to forget. There was one time in the human history when petroleum started to enter the market. Mexico was the Saudi Arabia of its time. There was more oil coming out of Mexico than Texas. Mexico was the greatest oil producer of, in a particular period of human history before oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia. So not only did American capital start to come over, So what is Diego Rivera saying? Again, look at this, Standard Oil is now taking over Mexican oil. Who's Standard Oil? You know Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller's corporation. If you filled your car at Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, those are all the old Standard Oil conglomeration. And so what was the Mexican Revolution about? In one level, getting rid of this crossing of the border and taking our resources, particularly the oil. Who else crossed the border around this time? A general, if I'm not mistaken, I think a young general Pershing and a General Eisenhower crossed over during the Mexican Revolution because it continued through World War I. Continued through World War I, and America was scared communism might cross Mexico's borders. Okay, and so there we get the story of Mexico. And the interesting thing in the story of Mexico, you probably don't realize the song Fernando, and I want you to listen to it a bit later, is about the Mexican Revolution. It's a revolutionary, and they speak of the Rio Grande. Even in the lyrics, I don't have time to play them for you. The Rio Grande is mentioned in the song. It's about the Mexican Revolution. Now, I want you to look at this flag, because we've been talking about flags. The Knights of the Golden Circle. On the eve of the Civil War, imagined a future state that combined Mexico and the United South. Before the American Civil War, before the Confederacy, there was a secret society known as the Knights. I want you to think of the word the Knights of the Golden Circle. And what do they want? The vision of the Knights of the Golden Circle was this: to break away from the US and create. So just think, 1848, Mexico's invaded. By 1850, they want to take more of Mexico and create what? A society. The Golden Circle would have included Cuba, with Havana at its capital, an entire economy based on rents, charging rents on natural resources, what we call a rentier state: coffee, sugar, tobacco, and cotton. For the Americans who had this vision, who would be cultivating all that? Slaves. See, this was going to be an entire slave-based economy, not on industry, but resources you charge a rent on. Coffee, a drug, cotton, tobacco, sugar. They eventually modified their plan, instead of focusing on Mexico and the Caribbean, on these states here. And this is the root of the American Civil War. It began with the desire, first of all, to violate Mexico's sovereignty. Look at the original flag. It's Mexico and the United South. And so sure enough, if you see the first Confederate flag, right, it's not an accident. This is where it comes from. You look at the first Confederate flag and the emblem of the Mexico and the United South. Now, what were they known as? The Knights of the Golden Circle. Now, what happened after the American Civil War was the following. This is where we get into race politics. A good number of the Southerners came from Scotland. And a good number of Scots are divided into clans. And the clan names usually begin with a Mick. McDonald's, right? If a lot of the clans from Scotland moved to the American South, after the American Civil War, an organization was formed that was calling for a rebirth of the American South. The Greek word for a rebirth or a cycle is a Ku Klux. And from Ku Klux, add the Scottish origins of the clans and what is born after the American Civil War, the Ku Klux Klan. And what do they often call their members? The Knights. Exactly. Now you see its origins. Okay, so from flags, this is serious stuff that I collect. Well before this is 2025. I am not good with flags. All of this is pre-2016. This is what I do, is I go and I collect these digital artifacts. I am not good with flags. There's Mexico, Mexico 2, communist Mexico, irrelevant Mexico. Okay, it's being sarcastic, right? But let's watch this. This is supposed to be humor. Trump cuts US aid to 3 Mexican countries. It's supposed to be 3 Central American countries. But do you see the mistake, right? Do you see now how the meme got combined with this screenshot from Fox News? Again, so when we go to this flag, right, I want you to think of the symbolism, right? Look what somebody did with this Mexican flag. I want you to think of that character. Benign stereotype, right? Speedy Gonzalez, right? With the sombrero. But let's just take this a bit further. 8 racist Hollywood costumes people still wear. This is 2013. And again, Gustavo Arellano is owning the stereotype. Do you notice the sombrero coming up over and over again? Hey amigo adult costume. Again, this is all 2014. The sombrero, the burro. You might say, okay, but then look at this. Now the border comes into our imagination. This is the Halloween. And look at the sombrero. Look at this. This is again 2016. Build the wall. 2 stereotypes in one, the man in the sombrero and what we associate with IKEA. This is North America according to the US in 2012. Right? No. This is seriously, it's called this Atlas of Stereotypes. Now you might say, okay, but look at when I was staying in a hotel in Washington, DC, what was on my door? Please make up the room now, right? In Spanish, and they're right here. Look what's on the other side. If I want to sleep, what does it say? Please don't bother me. The sleeping man in front of a cactus with a sombrero. This is a hotel in Washington, DC, the nation's capital. American Hotel Register Company. You get this, right? You see, I've been building up. So now this is the beginning of American nationalism, and it begins with this. What do I say? If a nation is a negative comparison, it began this, and this is what set off the Trump administration's first foray into the race was this speech. You see, if I say the nation is a negative comparison, we've been building up to this. I've been building up to this. This didn't come out of nowhere. 1839, Manifest Destiny. I'm saying, what has changed? And let's keep on going. The thing is, I'm not sure if this was a real tweet or not, but the thing is, God, would you be surprised, right? Okay. No, make Mexico pay for the wall is a violation of sovereignty. You can, according to the rules of international relations, you cannot tell another country how to spend their money or what to do with that money, right? That's a violation of sovereignty, right? Lalo Alcaraz. This was back in 2015 when he drew this cartoon. 10 years later, what has changed? Is he still in love with Putin? Putin is still there, right? Putin is still there. Rapolandia, formerly Mexico. Baja California, land of unbuilt Trump condos. Now let's just take it to the present. What are a lot of people saying about when Trump wants to say we want to annex Gaza? Who do they all refer to? Jared Kushner, and saying that's all good waterfront property. And what do we see here? Again, now that this is again semiotics. This goes into a different direction. So what is Lalo saying? Sure, we will build the wall and we'll do it for free, but what border does he go to? The border before 1846, you see. We'll be glad to build the border for free. Now, what's the consequence for this on the campus I teach at? The Vice President of Student Affairs says, members of Customs and Border Control participated in our career fair. A number of students expressed concern regarding the presence of border control on campus, you see. The border doesn't stop there for these students. I reiterated that Customs and Border Patrol is an employer that has attended our career fair in the past, and their attendance was for recruitment purposes, not enforcement. In other words, this isn't a cover to launch an illegal raid. I'm sorry, a raid on the so-called illegal document. I also assured students I met with the CUSM. That CUSM will provide advanced communication regarding Customs and Border Patrol attendance at events on campus in the future. What does this mean? Yeah, that even our campus, the border is felt all the way there. Fiestas, siestas, and drug lords. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So let's get to the drug lords. These are Lego figures of a group called the Knights Templar. If you play Assassin's Creed, they're the bad guys, right? I want you now, let's go to the drug cartels. One in particular, the Caballeros Templarios de Michoacán. Look at their emblem symbolism. Now, drug cartels are an obvious example, okay, of the border, something that crosses Mexico's border. But this is interesting. This particular group, why do I find them interesting? It's the following. The founders converted to a very American form of Christianity, evangelical Christianity, when they were migrants in the US. They returned to Mexico, you see. And they found religious discipline was a useful tool to keep criminal troops in line. So there you go. What am I saying? Is new forms of religion cross the border and evangelical Christianity. Like I said, in Chiapas, Islam and evangelical Christianity compete with each other. These guys take their name from a crusading order. Now, when COVID hit Spain, I'm sorry, when COVID hit Mexico, who do you think in the cartel areas where the Mexican state's presence is not felt, who do you think was handing out water and masks? It was the cartels. It was the cartels. Okay, what else crosses Mexico's border? The Ottoman Empire in forms of Turkish telenovelas and vice versa. Mexican telenovelas cross over across many borders, but they're particularly loved in the Middle East. So it's Suleiman, Solomon, the Grand Sultan. When Suleiman ruled most of Europe, right, it looked like this. These are the Ottoman troops. And what is this political cartoon in Vienna saying? We're going to gastro-nationalism now. The Ottomans conquered us in Austria. That's why we celebrate with the croissant. Now they're conquering us with what? Their kebabs. The Turkish kebabs, the shawarma. So then you have a Viennese nationalist party saying, they're running on the platform, let's restore our traditional sausages. Now, you think this might be extreme. This is a joke. If Turkey joined the EU, this is what the euro would have looked like. No, even in Italy, what is this saying? We don't want the kebab because what does the kebab equal? 9/11s. Kebabs are brought by Muslims. And what did Muslims bring to America? 9/11. What do we take pride in? Our polenta in north of Italy, not couscous, a Moroccan dish. That's gastro-nationalism. This is taco pastor. You see, where did the taco pastor tradition come from? And this going back to my theme of fusion, Lebanese migrants who came to Mexico. Lebanese migrants. The most famous Lebanese migrant in Mexico being? Any guesses? She has a 100% Lebanese last name. Not her, sorry. She's the one who, Ava Longoria told me that tacos pastors were brought by the Lebanese. Dude, where is she? Salma Hayek. Salma Hayek is 100% Lebanese. Hayek is a Lebanese last name. Yeah. And here she is expressing her solidarity with her native Lebanon when an explosion happened. So, of course, when this is my sister who lived in Guadalajara, who lived in Jalisco. This is how I know Mexico was, she crossed the border because her husband went to medical school. And we tend to forget that. There's a good number of Americans who crossed the border to go to medical school. Her husband did medical school in Guadalajara. And when she writes this story of taco árabes, what is she saying? It's not an accident Middle Eastern food and Mexican food come together so well. Okay. I know, I'm just gonna end with one video. Sorry about this, it's just a little bit over, but it's just a really wonderful way to do it. So if you could just give me 2 minutes.
The butterflies, they go all the way to Mexico. Like, I don't know where to go. If I would go to Mexico, like, how do they get there? It's like a mystery.
After more than 2,000 miles, they've almost reached their winter home. And there's a welcome party waiting to greet them.
Abuelita, vamos a comprar las flores.
Vamos, hija, vamos a comprar muchas.
Vamos a ir al panteón y le vamos a adornar tantito a mi abuelito. ponemos flores porque atraen a las ánimas. Es por el olor que les gustan.
Okay, so this may just be coincidental, but the arrival of the monarchs has come at the same time as the Day of the Dead for so long, it's become part of the culture.
Las mariposas significan que son las ánimas. Hola, mariposa. Cuando veo una mariposa, pienso que es uno de mis abuelitos, o de mis tíos, o de los angelitos.
It's not just butterflies from Iowa that travel here. They're joined by immigrants from across the Midwest and as far north as Canada, all heading for refuge in the forests of central Mexico.
Millones y millones de mariposas vuelan en estas montañas. Nunca han estado en México en su vida. Las mariposas aquí están a salvo durante el invierno.
It's one of the greatest homecomings on Earth. Even though every monarch here has another home far away. Each one started life on a milkweed someplace like Beaconsfield, Iowa. It's hard to know where these monarchs belong. Iowa, Mexico, on the wing, or all of those. These butterflies show that the Earth has no borders. Everything is interconnected. Turns out, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. It's linked to the rest of the planet.
So that's just a really good way to end this class. We're only halfway done, but this is how much it takes. This could easily be its own class. But thank you.
I'm about to cash this check for 50.
For questions, it's a fault of mine. I apologize.
You guys, let's give Dr. Barber. So many great images, so many great remarks. Did everyone